The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of LaGuardia Airport, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Anthony Robinson checked his watch, 5:45 a.m. He was early, just as he preferred to be. At 45, Anthony had built his habits around being prepared, being first and most importantly, being underestimated. He adjusted the strap of his worn leather messenger bag, a gift from his grandfather when he'd opened his first office. Inside were the final contracts that would change everything. After 20 years of building his company from a small consulting firm to a major player in the aviation industry, today marked the final step of his biggest achievement, the acquisition of North Star Airlines. Anthony wore his usual travel outfit, dark jeans, a simple navy sweater, and comfortable walking shoes. He could afford designer suits, he owned plenty, but when traveling he chose comfort over appearance. His father had taught him that true power didn't need to announce itself. "Morning." He nodded to the security guard who had seen him pass through dozens of times before. The guard smiled back with a familiar nod, but no recognition of Anthony's significance. That's how Anthony liked it. He made his way to the premium security line, his TSA pre-check status saving him from removing his shoes or laptop. As he waited, Anthony scrolled through his messages. His assistant had already confirmed his hotel in Chicago and the car service. 3 board members had sent last-minute questions about the acquisition, which he answered quickly. No one outside a small circle knew that by tomorrow, North Star Airlines would be part of Horizon Aviation Group, his company. The coffee shop near his gate was just opening. Anthony ordered a black coffee and found a quiet corner to review his notes. The morning bustle of the airport flowed around him. Business travelers with their briefcases and laptops, families corralling sleepy children, airport staff beginning their day. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. "Knock 'em dead, Dad, bring me back deep dish." Anthony smiled. Lisa was in her second year of college studying aerospace engineering. She had her heart set on redesigning aircraft for greater efficiency. Her passion made all his hard work worthwhile. Anthony thought back to where it all began. His first job had been cleaning planes overnight at this very airport. He'd been 19, taking night classes in business while working full-time. He remembered the weight of the vacuum, the smell of cleaning solution, and how he'd study flight manuals during breaks. He'd been fascinated by every aspect of aviation, the mechanics, the business model, the global connections. 26 years later, he'd built Horizon from nothing. First as a small parts supplier, then expanding to maintenance services, then consulting, and finally buying small regional carriers. Today's acquisition would make Horizon one of the top 5 aviation companies in the country. An announcement broke through his thoughts. "Attention passengers. North Star Airlines Flight 3342 to Chicago O'Hare will begin boarding in 15 minutes. Anthony gathered his things and headed to the gate. He liked to observe the pre-boarding process, a habit from his consulting days when he'd evaluated airlines on their efficiency. Gate B-17 was filling with the usual mix of passengers. Business people typing last-minute emails, tourists excited about their Chicago plans, a few families with children, the gate agent, a woman with shoulder-length blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail, arranged boarding passes at her station. Her name tag read Teresa. She had the crisp, professional look of someone who took her job seriously. Blue uniform pressed, scarf perfectly tied, posture straight as she called for passengers needing special assistance to approach the gate. Anthony found a seat near the boarding area, watching as Teresa efficiently helped an elderly couple and a young mother with twin toddlers. He admired her patience as one of the twins had a small meltdown over a dropped toy. He checked his boarding pass on his phone, seat 2A, first class. Anthony rarely flew first class in his early days, saving every penny to reinvest in his business. Even now, with his success, he sometimes felt strange about the luxury. But today was different. Today he was flying on what would soon be his airline. More passengers gathered around the gate. Anthony observed a group of men in business suits, presumably heading to the same industry conference in Chicago that served as his cover story for the trip. Only his CFO knew the real purpose, signing the final acquisition papers with North Star's board. His phone buzzed again. A message from his lawyer. "Documents received. Everything ready for signatures tomorrow." Anthony replied with a thumbs-up emoji and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The gate area had filled now, Anthony noticed how passengers naturally sorted themselves. The frequent flyers who stood impatiently near the boarding line, headphones in ears. Families trying to keep children entertained. The occasional nervous flyer clutching their boarding pass too tightly. Anthony's thoughts drifted to his late wife, Diane. She'd been gone 5 years now, but he still caught himself thinking, I need to tell Diane about this whenever something significant happened. She'd been with him from the beginning, believing in his vision when Horizon was just a dream scribbled on napkins at their kitchen table. Cancer had taken her too soon, but her strength remained with him and their daughter. I wish you could see this, Dee, he thought. Diane had always insisted he would own an airline someday, even when they were struggling to pay rent. The boarding announcement cut through his memories. We now invite our first-class passengers and Diamond Elite members to board at this time. Anthony stood, shouldering his bag. He pulled up his boarding pass on his phone and joined the short line for first-class boarding. A few business people moved ahead of him, a white-haired man in an expensive suit, a young woman in a tailored blazer. Teresa checked their boarding passes with quick efficiency, smiling professionally as she welcomed them aboard. When Anthony stepped forward, something changed. Teresa's smile flickered as her eyes moved from his face to his casual clothes and back again. It was a look Anthony knew well, confusion then suspicion. He'd seen it countless times over his career. That split-second assessment, the assumptions made before he even spoke. Good morning, Anthony said, holding up his phone with the boarding pass displayed. Teresa frowned slightly. This is first-class boarding only, sir, she said, her voice carrying a hint of doubt. Yes, I know, Anthony replied calmly, gesturing to his boarding pass. Seat 2A. Teresa didn't move to scan his pass. Instead, she looked past him to the growing line behind. Perhaps you misunderstood the announcement? We're only boarding first class at this moment. A familiar weight settled in Anthony's stomach. This dance again. He kept his voice even, his expression neutral. Years of business negotiations had taught him to control his reactions, especially in moments like these. I understand, he said. I'm a first-class passenger. He held his phone closer, the boarding pass clearly displaying his seat assignment and class of service. Teresa hesitated, then reached for his phone. She studied the boarding pass with unusual scrutiny, her eyes narrowing slightly. May I see some ID, please? Anthony noticed she hadn't asked the previous passengers for identification. He reached for his wallet, maintaining his composure while being acutely aware of the people watching the exchange. This was another skill he'd perfected over the years, staying dignified while being questioned in ways others rarely were. As he pulled out his driver's license, Anthony caught sight of his own reflection in the window behind the gate. He saw what Teresa had seen, not the CEO of a major corporation, not the man about to acquire this very airline, but simply a black man in casual clothes who didn't fit her image of a first-class passenger. What Teresa couldn't see was that tomorrow, everything would change. The papers in Anthony's bag would transform him from just another passenger to the owner of the airline she worked for. But for now, he simply handed over his ID, waiting for this familiar moment to pass, knowing that the true surprise was still to come. Teresa studied Anthony's driver's license with unusual attention, looking back and forth between his face and the ID several times. Behind him, the first-class line was growing. Anthony could feel eyes on his back, the familiar weight of being a spectacle when all he wanted was to board a plane like everyone else. Is there a problem? Anthony asked, his voice level despite the knot forming in his stomach. Teresa handed back his ID with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Your boarding pass says 2A, but I'm showing that seat as reserved for one of our Diamond Elite members. Her fingers tapped rapidly on her keyboard. Anthony took a slow, deep breath. In 20 years of building his business, he'd learned that getting angry never helped these situations. I booked that seat myself yesterday, he explained calmly. I'm also a Diamond member, but even if I wasn't, the seat is paid for. The businessman directly behind Anthony cleared his throat loudly. Is there a hold-up here? Some of us have connections to make. Teresa glanced at the growing line, then back at Anthony. Sir, would you mind stepping aside while I sort this out? The other first-class passengers can board while I check your reservation. Anthony didn't move. My reservation is confirmed. I'd prefer to board with the rest of first class, as I'm entitled to. A few passengers exchanged glances. An older woman near the front of the economy line whispered something to her husband. Anthony pretended not to notice, keeping his attention on Teresa, who was now speaking into her headset. "I need a confirmation on a passenger in 2A, she said, turning slightly away from Anthony. "The system is showing some discrepancy." Anthony pulled out his phone again and opened his email, scrolling to find his confirmation from yesterday. He'd been flying Northstar for years, long before he'd considered acquiring the airline. His status had never been questioned until today. "Here's my confirmation email," he said, showing her the screen. "Sent at 2:17 p.m. yesterday. Seat 2A confirmed." Teresa barely glanced at it. "I still need to verify this in our system, sir. Policy." The businessman behind him stepped around to the next agent who had just opened her station. Other first-class passengers followed, streaming past Anthony as if he were invisible. He watched as they handed over their boarding passes, most getting nothing more than a cursory glance before being welcomed aboard. "This is ridiculous," Anthony said quietly, more to himself than to Teresa. "Excuse me?" Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "I said this is ridiculous," Anthony repeated louder this time. "I've shown you my boarding pass and ID. I've shown you my confirmation email. The other passengers didn't have to provide any of that. What exactly are you verifying that requires me to step aside?" A few heads turned their way. Teresa's cheeks flushed pink. "Sir, if you continue to be disruptive, I'll need to call security." The threat hung in the air. Anthony had been here before too. That moment when simply standing up for himself was labeled as disruptive or aggressive. The unfairness of it burned in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "I'm not being disruptive," he said evenly. "I'm trying to board my flight just like everyone else. If there's a legitimate issue with my reservation, please explain what it is." A middle-aged woman waiting in the economy line caught his eye and gave him a small nod of support. Anthony nodded back, grateful for the silent acknowledgement. Teresa spoke into her headset again. "Can I get a supervisor to gate B17? I have a situation." She emphasized the last word while looking directly at Anthony. The second gate agent, who had been handling the overflow of first-class passengers, glanced over with curiosity. "Do you need help, Teresa?" "No, I've called for Ray," Teresa replied, her voice carrying a hint of self-righteousness. "This passenger insists on boarding first class, but there's an issue with his reservation." "There is no issue with my reservation," Anthony said firmly. "I would appreciate it if you'd stop saying that." More passengers were watching now, some with curiosity, others with impatience. Anthony felt the familiar isolation of being the center of unwanted attention. He'd worked hard to get where he was, to earn his place in first class and soon, as the owner of this airline. Yet here he was, being treated like an intruder. A young man in the economy line had his phone out, not quite recording but holding it at an angle that suggested he might start at any moment. The sight made Anthony's stomach turn. Would this become another viral video? Another black man being hassled just for existing in a space some people thought he didn't belong? "I'd like to speak to your supervisor now," Anthony said, his patience wearing thin. "He's on his way," Teresa replied curtly, turning to help another passenger and effectively dismissing him. Anthony stood his ground, though every instinct told him to walk away. He thought about his daughter, about the example he wanted to set. Walking away might be easier, but it wouldn't be right. 3 minutes past 5. The first-class line had cleared and priority boarding had begun. Still, Anthony waited, watching as Teresa efficiently processed other passengers, her demeanor transforming into pleasant professionalism with each new person who approached, none of whom were asked for ID. Finally, a man in a sharp navy suit approached from the jet bridge. His name tag identified him as Raymond Chen, gate supervisor. He had a calm, authoritative presence as he spoke briefly to Teresa, who pointed discreetly at Anthony. Raymond approached with an appropriately neutral expression. "Good morning, sir. I understand there's some confusion with your boarding." "There's no confusion on my part," Anthony replied. "I have a confirmed first-class reservation on this flight. Seat 2A. He showed Raymond his boarding pass and ID without being asked, having learned long ago that being proactive with documentation saved time. Raymond glanced at the boarding pass, then at the ID, his expression changing subtly as he read Anthony's name. A flicker of recognition crossed his features. "Mr. Robinson?" he said. his tone shifting to one of respectful recognition. I apologize for the inconvenience. There's absolutely no issue with your reservation. Teresa looked up sharply at the change in Raymond's voice. May I ask what caused the confusion? Anthony asked. Raymond glanced at Teresa, then back to Anthony. Sometimes our system flags certain reservation changes for verification. Your seat was only confirmed yesterday, which might have triggered an alert. The explanation sounded plausible but not entirely convincing. Anthony noted that Raymond hadn't actually addressed the real issue, that other passengers with last-minute bookings hadn't faced the same scrutiny. But he could see Teresa watching them intently, and he had no desire to embarrass her publicly. The point would be better made in private after the flight, I see, Anthony said simply. Please, allow me to escort you aboard personally, Raymond offered, gesturing toward the jet bridge. As they walked past Teresa, her expression had transformed from suspicion to confusion. She clearly couldn't understand why her supervisor was giving VIP treatment to the passenger she'd just been ready to call security on. Thank you, Raymond, Anthony said as they walked down the jet bridge. I appreciate your help resolving this. Raymond lowered his voice. Mr. Robinson, if I may ask, are you by chance related to Horizon Aviation Group? So he did know. Anthony wasn't surprised. The acquisition talks had been quiet but not completely secret in industry circles. I am, Anthony confirmed, matching Raymond's hushed tone. Raymond's eyes widened slightly. I thought so. There was a memo last week about potential changes in the company. Your name was mentioned. They paused just before the aircraft door. The announcement won't be official until tomorrow, Anthony said. I'd appreciate your discretion until then. Of course, sir, absolutely. Raymond looked both impressed and slightly nervous. Again, I apologize for any inconvenience at boarding. If there's anything you need during your flight, please don't hesitate to ask. Anthony nodded, wondering how differently Teresa would have treated him had she known who he was about to become. But that was precisely why he didn't flash his status around. Character revealed itself in how people treated those they thought had no power. The flight attendant at the door greeted him warmly, showing him to his seat. As Anthony settled in, he pulled out his phone to send a quick text to his daughter before takeoff. Interesting start to the trip. Tell you about it later. His daughter replied immediately with her usual humor. Drama already? Save the details for dinner. Anthony smiled, putting his phone in airplane mode. He glanced out the window at the busy tarmac, thinking about tomorrow's meeting and what would follow. The acquisition would change everything, for his company, for North Star Airlines, and perhaps for people like Teresa too. A flight attendant approached with a pre-departure beverage. Good morning, Mr. Robinson. Welcome aboard. Can I offer you champagne or orange juice before takeoff? Anthony looked up, surprised to hear his name. Orange juice, please. Thank you. As she poured his drink, he noticed Raymond speaking with the cabin crew near the galley, occasionally glancing his way. Word was spreading. By the time they reached Chicago, everyone on the plane would probably know that the quiet man in 2A was more than just another passenger. Anthony sipped his juice, letting the cool liquid wash away the bitter taste of the boarding experience. Tomorrow things would change. But today had been an important reminder of why those changes were necessary. The flight to Chicago was smooth, the clear blue sky offering perfect visibility over the patchwork landscape below. Anthony watched through his window as farmland and small towns passed beneath them. He'd made this journey countless times, but today felt different. By this time tomorrow, these planes, the staff, even the familiar blue and silver logo on the napkins would all be part of Horizon Aviation Group. He opened his laptop, reviewing the final acquisition documents one last time. 20 years of building his company had led to this moment. From a one-man consulting firm operating out of his garage to a corporation about to acquire a major airline, Anthony smiled, thinking of how his father would have reacted. Always told you to aim high, he would have said. A flight attendant named Patty had been especially attentive since takeoff. Anthony suspected Raymond had said something to the crew. She appeared now at his side. More coffee, Mr. Robinson? She asked. Thank you, Patty, he replied, closing his laptop as she poured. How long have you been with North Star? 15 years this December, she said with obvious pride. Started right out of college. You've seen a lot of changes, I imagine. Oh, yes. She lowered her voice slightly. And I hear more are coming soon. Anthony just smiled. The news was spreading faster than he'd anticipated. Change can be good, he said simply. I hope so, Patty replied. The last CEO cut our benefits and added more routes without hiring enough staff. We're all hoping the new ownership remembers there are real people behind the profits. The comment caught Anthony off guard. It was exactly the kind of honest feedback executives rarely heard. I'm sure they'll keep that in mind, he said thoughtfully. As Patty moved on to the next passenger, Anthony opened his notebook and jotted down staff benefits and workload concerns. The acquisition wasn't just about numbers and market share. It was about people, thousands of them whose livelihoods would soon be his responsibility. His phone buzzed with a text from his chief financial officer. Board assembled in Chicago. All systems go. The plane began its descent into O'Hare. Anthony put away his documents and gazed out at the sprawling city coming into view. Chicago had always been good to him. His first major client had been based here, taking a chance on his fledgling company when larger firms wouldn't return his calls. As the plane taxied to the gate, Anthony noticed unusual activity. 2 ground staff in high-visibility vests stood waiting on the tarmac, and a man in a suit was visible just inside the jetway. Something had changed. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Local time is 9:17 a.m., and the temperature is a pleasant 68 degrees. We've arrived at gate C14. Please remain seated until we've reached the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. There was a brief pause before he continued, his tone shifting slightly. We've been informed that a special guest is joining us today. We're honored to have with us the CEO of Horizon Aviation Group, Mr. Anthony Robinson. On behalf of North Star Airlines, we'd like to welcome you aboard, sir. A wave of whispers swept through the cabin. Passengers twisted in their seats trying to spot the important guest. Anthony felt his cheeks warm as dozens of eyes found him. This wasn't how he'd planned it. The captain wasn't finished. For those of you who may not be aware, tomorrow marks an exciting new chapter for our airline. We'll be joining the Horizon family, and Mr. Robinson will be at the helm of the newly expanded company. More whispers, louder now. Anthony maintained his composure, nodding politely to the curious stares from other passengers. This premature announcement complicated things. He made a mental note to find out who had authorized the captain to share this information. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Patty approached again. Mr. Robinson, we've arranged for you to deplane first. There's a welcome committee waiting. Anthony gathered his things, acutely aware of the attention. This wasn't his style. He'd always preferred working behind the scenes. But as he stood, several passengers offered congratulations and handshakes. My son works in your Atlanta office, one woman said. He always talks about how well Horizon treats its people. Thank you, Anthony replied, genuinely touched. That means a lot. He made his way to the front of the aircraft where the captain and co-pilot had emerged from the cockpit. Mr. Robinson, the captain said, extending his hand. Captain Doug Phillips, it's an honor to have you on board today. Thank you for the smooth flight, Captain, Anthony replied, shaking his hand, though I was hoping to keep a lower profile until tomorrow's official announcement. Captain Phillips looked embarrassed. My apologies, sir. We received word from headquarters to acknowledge your presence. I assumed it was cleared with you. Before Anthony could respond, a commotion at the aircraft door caught their attention. Teresa, the gate agent from LaGuardia, stood frozen in the jetway entrance, her face a picture of shock. Behind her was Raymond, the supervisor, looking equally surprised. Mr. Chen, Captain Phillips greeted Raymond. You've met our special guest, I understand. Raymond nodded, recovering quickly. Yes, briefly in New York. He turned to Anthony. Welcome to Chicago, Mr. Robinson. We weren't expecting you on this flight. Teresa hadn't moved or spoken. Her eyes were fixed on Anthony, her expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror as she connected the dots. Thank you, Raymond, Anthony said. He turned to Teresa, whose name tag was now partially hidden by her scarf. Hello again. Teresa finally found her voice. You're Anthony Robinson? From Horizon Aviation? That's right, he confirmed calmly. The same Horizon Aviation that's buying North Star? Her voice had risen an octave. Raymond stepped forward. Teresa, Mr. Robinson is here for tomorrow's official signing. He'll be our new CEO. The color drained from Teresa's face. I wasn't told. There's no way you could have known, Anthony said, his voice measured. The acquisition hasn't been announced publicly yet, but they both knew that wasn't the issue. Even without knowing who he was, she should have treated him, should treat all passengers with respect and fairness. A small crowd had gathered in the jetway, flight attendants, ground crew, and a few curious passengers who had deplaned behind Anthony. The air was thick with awkward tension. Teresa swallowed hard. Mr. Robinson, about what happened at LaGuardia. Perhaps we could discuss that later, Anthony suggested, not wanting to embarrass her in front of everyone. I believe there's a car waiting for me. Yes, sir, Raymond jumped in. Right this way. As they walked up the jetway, Anthony could feel Teresa following a few steps behind. The terminal was unusually busy for a weekday morning. Near the gate, a group of people in business attire stood waiting, the welcome committee Patty had mentioned. A distinguished man in his 60s stepped forward. Anthony, welcome to Chicago. It was William Bennett, the current CEO of North Star Airlines. Tomorrow he would become a board member of the expanded Horizon Group. Bill, good to see you, Anthony replied, shaking his hand. I wasn't expecting a reception committee. Change of plans, Bill said with a wink. The board is eager to meet with you before tomorrow's formalities, and the press got wind of your arrival somehow. Sure enough, Anthony spotted 2 reporters with photographers hovering nearby. This day was veering further and further from his carefully laid plans. Mr. Robinson, one of the reporters approached. Can you comment on tomorrow's acquisition? How will this affect North Star's routes and employees? Before Anthony could answer, he noticed Teresa standing a few feet away, still looking shell-shocked. A thought struck him. Actually, he said to the reporter, I'd like to address something important about the transition. He gestured for Teresa to join them. After a moment's hesitation, she stepped forward. One of my first priorities will be reviewing customer service protocols across both airlines, Anthony said clearly. Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of appearance or background. He met Teresa's eyes briefly. Sometimes we all need a reminder of that. Teresa looked down, her cheeks flushing. Will there be staffing changes? Another reporter called out. Anthony turned to face the small crowd that had gathered. Change is inevitable in any merger, but my philosophy has always been to focus on education and improvement, rather than punishment. People can grow when given the opportunity. He could feel Teresa's surprised gaze on him. William Bennett looked pleased. That's why we chose Horizon, folks. Anthony built his company on those values. As the impromptu press conference continued, Anthony found himself thinking about tomorrow's board meeting. There would be expectations, pressures to cut costs and maximize profits. But the conversation with Patty on the plane and the encounter with Teresa had reminded him of something essential. Airlines weren't just fleets and balance sheets. They were people, pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, mechanics, and passengers. His success would ultimately be measured not just in dollars, but in dignity. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of handshakes, introductions, and carefully worded responses to the press. Anthony maintained his professional smile through it all, even as his mind kept returning to the encounter at LaGuardia. By noon, he had been whisked to North Star's Chicago headquarters, a gleaming tower of steel and glass overlooking Lake Michigan. We've set up in the main boardroom, William told him as they rode the elevator to the 47th floor. The executive team is eager to meet you before tomorrow's formal signing. Anthony nodded, straightening his tie. He'd changed into a suit at the airport, transforming from casual traveler to corporate leader. The weight of what was happening settled on his shoulders. 2,000 employees would soon be looking to him for leadership. One question before we go in, William said, lowering his voice. That gate agent from New York, Teresa Wilson. What happened there? So word had traveled. Anthony wasn't surprised. A misunderstanding, he replied simply. William raised an eyebrow. Raymond Chen called me directly after your plane took off. He was concerned there might be repercussions. For Teresa? Anthony shook his head. That's not how I operate, Bill. You know that. The elevator doors opened to a reception area where a group of assistants waited with folders and tablets. William's secretary approached immediately. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Robinson, the board is assembled, and Ms. Wilson has arrived from LaGuardia as requested. Anthony turned to William in surprise. You flew Teresa in? Today, William smiled. I thought it might be useful. She's waiting in my office. We can deal with that situation after the board meeting. Anthony wasn't sure how he felt about William's intervention. He'd planned to handle the situation differently, perhaps with a phone call or during his next trip to New York. Flying Teresa to Chicago seemed excessive and potentially intimidating for her. Let's focus on the board first, Anthony said, pushing his concerns aside for the moment. The boardroom was impressive. A long table of polished walnut surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of the city. 12 people rose as Anthony and William entered, their expressions ranging from cautious to enthusiastic. Ladies and gentlemen, William announced, I'm pleased to introduce Anthony Robinson, CEO of Horizon Aviation Group and, after tomorrow, our new chief executive. The next hour was devoted to introductions and preliminary discussions about the transition. Anthony listened more than he spoke, taking note of who asked questions about employee retention and who focused solely on shareholder value. By the end, he had a good sense of the personalities and priorities around the table. We'll reconvene tomorrow for the official signing, William concluded. Anthony, if you'd join me in my office now. As the board members filed out, several stopped to welcome Anthony personally. The last was a woman in her early 60s, Patricia Morales, the longest-serving board member. I've followed your career for years, Mr. Robinson, she said, shaking his hand firmly. From regional maintenance to full-service aviation. Impressive. Thank you, Anthony replied. I believe in building gradually and sustainably. Patricia nodded. That approach shows respect for both the business and its people. I hope you'll maintain that philosophy here. That's exactly my intention, Anthony assured her. When everyone else had left, William led Anthony to his office, a corner suite with the same spectacular views as the boardroom. Coffee, William offered. Please, Anthony said, noticing Teresa sitting stiffly in one of the visitor chairs. She stood as they entered, her expression a mixture of anxiety and embarrassment. Mr. Robinson, she said formally. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her uniform jacket. Ms. Wilson, Anthony replied with a nod. I didn't expect to see you in Chicago today. William interjected. I thought it best to address this situation promptly. Clear the air before tomorrow's announcement. An awkward silence followed. Anthony didn't appreciate William's handling of the situation, which felt more like a disciplinary action than a conversation. William, Anthony said carefully, would you mind if Ms. Wilson and I spoke privately for a moment? William looked surprised but nodded. Of course. I'll check on the preparations for tomorrow's press conference. He left, closing the door behind him. Teresa remained standing, her posture rigid. Mr. Robinson, I want to apologize for what happened this morning. I didn't know who you were. Anthony raised a hand to pause her. Please sit down. He took a seat across from her rather than behind William's imposing desk. And that's exactly the point. You didn't know who I was and it shouldn't have mattered. Teresa sat, her eyes downcast. I understand if you want me terminated. Mr. Bennett made it clear that was a possibility. Anthony frowned. That explained her nervousness. Is that what he told you? That I wanted you fired? Not exactly, she admitted. But he said incidents like this reflected poorly on the airline, especially given who you are. Teresa, Anthony said, using her first name deliberately to shift the tone. I don't want you fired. That solves nothing. She looked up, clearly surprised. You don't? What happened this morning wasn't just about you and me. It's about patterns and systems that encourage certain behaviors. Anthony leaned forward. Tell me, what were you thinking when I approached the gate? Teresa hesitated. Honestly? Complete honesty. No repercussions. She took a deep breath. I thought you might be in the wrong line. You weren't dressed like our typical first-class passengers. And what do those passengers usually look like? Business attire mostly. Suits, expensive watches, she paused. And usually white, Anthony finished for her. Teresa flinched slightly but nodded. Yes, especially on morning business routes. Here's what I want to know, Anthony continued. Is there any training about unconscious bias in your customer service program? Teresa thought for a moment. We had a diversity workshop last year. 1 hour during our annual training. 1 hour, Anthony repeated. Out of how many hours of total training? 40, I think. Anthony nodded, making a mental note. And is there any incentive, formal or informal, to be extra vigilant about who boards in first class? Teresa's expression changed, a hint of realization crossing her face. We get quarterly reviews that include metrics on boarding integrity. It's part of our performance evaluation. Boarding integrity, Anthony echoed. So you're rewarded for catching people who might be in the wrong line, but not specifically trained on how to do that without bias. I never thought of it that way, Teresa admitted. Anthony stood and walked to the window, looking out at the vast city below. Teresa, what happened today was bigger than both of us. You were following a system that was designed in a way that almost guaranteed situations like ours would occur. He turned back to face her. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it helps explain it. Teresa seemed to be processing his words. What happens now? Now, Anthony said, I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you could change how gate agents are trained or evaluated, what would you do differently? The question clearly caught her off guard. My thoughts? I'm not in management, Mr. Robinson, but you're on the front lines. You see what works and what doesn't. Your perspective matters. Teresa considered this for a long moment. I think we need more than just a 1-hour workshop. We need practical training with specific scenarios, and maybe the metrics should be more balanced, not just catching people in the wrong line, but also ensuring everyone feels welcomed. Anthony smiled. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. A knock at the door interrupted them. William poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but the press is assembling downstairs. They're expecting both of us in 20 minutes. We'll be right there, Anthony assured him. When the door closed again, he turned back to Teresa. I have a proposition for you. A proposition, she repeated uncertainly. I'm forming a customer experience task force as part of the merger. People from both airlines working together to establish new training and service protocols. Anthony paused. I'd like you to be part of it, Teresa's eyes widened. Me? But after what happened, because of what happened, Anthony corrected her. You've just had a powerful learning experience. That's valuable. I don't know what to say, Teresa admitted. Say yes, Anthony suggested. Help us do better. After a moment's hesitation, Teresa nodded. Yes, I'd like to help. Good, Anthony said with a smile. The first meeting is next month in New York. My office will send details. He extended his hand. No hard feelings? Teresa stood and shook his hand firmly. No hard feelings, and thank you for seeing more than just my mistake. As they headed downstairs for the press conference, Anthony felt a sense of purpose stronger than he had in years. The acquisition was important, but what he would do with North Star afterward mattered even more. Tomorrow, the papers would report on stock prices and market share. But Anthony was already thinking beyond that, to new training programs, revised metrics, and a company culture where dignity came first. The real work was just beginning. 6 months later, Anthony found himself back at LaGuardia Airport, watching the early morning crowd flow through the terminal. So much had changed since that pivotal day when Teresa had stopped him from boarding. The merger was complete. The newly designed uniforms were being rolled out, and today marked the official launch of Horizon North Star's revamped customer service program. Anthony had chosen to be here in person rather than at headquarters. The real test of change wasn't in boardrooms but on the front lines. He checked his watch, 5:45 a.m., just like that morning 6 months ago. This time, however, he wasn't traveling incognito. His tailored suit and company ID badge made his position clear to anyone who noticed. Morning, Mr. Robinson, called a maintenance worker as he passed. Word had spread among the staff about the CEO, who regularly walked the terminals, talking to employees at all levels. Anthony waved back with a smile. Building relationships with ground-level staff had been one of his priorities since taking over. Every Friday he hosted lunch with a different department, listening more than talking. He made his way to Gate B17, the same gate where it had all begun. The area had been remodeled along with all Horizon North Star gates, featuring new seating with built-in chargers, clearer signage, and a redesigned boarding area that eliminated the physical separation between first-class and economy lines. The early flight to Chicago was preparing to board. Anthony stood back, observing the new process being implemented today for the first time. Instead of the traditional boarding groups, the gate agent announced, "We invite passengers who need extra time or assistance to board now. This includes families with young children, those with mobility challenges, and anyone who simply needs a bit more time to get settled. After those passengers had boarded, she continued, "We'll now begin general boarding, starting with rows 20 through 30. No priority for first class. No elite status announcements. Just a simple, dignified process that respected everyone's time and comfort." First-class passengers would still have their premium experience on board, but the divisive hierarchy at the gate was gone. Anthony nodded with satisfaction as he watched the smooth flow of passengers. Research had shown that this approach actually reduced overall boarding time, while also decreasing complaints about the process. "What do you think?" Anthony turned to find Teresa beside him. Her uniform was different now. The new Horizon North Star colors with a pin that identified her as a member of the Customer Experience Task Force. "I think it's working exactly as planned," he replied. "How do the gate agents feel about it?" Teresa smiled. "Most of them love it. Fewer arguments, less stress. Though some of the old-timers miss announcing all the elite status levels." Anthony laughed. "Change is never easy." Over the past 6 months, Teresa had become one of the most valuable members of the task force. Her first-hand experience with bias, both receiving and perpetuating it, had given her unique insights into how to improve the system. "Your flight to Denver boards in 30 minutes, Teresa said. "Gate C22. "Thanks for the reminder." Anthony had a meeting with regional managers in Denver, but he'd come early specifically to witness today's launch. "Before I head over, how are the new training modules being received?" Teresa's expression brightened. "Really well. The scenario-based approach makes a huge difference. Instead of just talking about bias in the abstract, we use real situations, including ours." She paused. "Is it still strange for you, having our story used as a training example?" Anthony considered the question. "A little. But if it helps prevent someone else from feeling what I felt that day, it's worth it." The training program had been completely overhauled. New hires now spent 3 full days on inclusive customer service, and existing staff went through a comprehensive 2-day refresher. Teresa herself had become one of the trainers, sharing her perspective with unflinching honesty. "The feedback numbers are impressive," Teresa continued. "Customer satisfaction is up 12% in just 2 months since the pilot program. And employee satisfaction? Even better, up 17%. Teresa's pride was evident. "Turns out people like working in a system that treats everyone with dignity, employees included." Anthony nodded. Changing the culture had required looking beyond customer interactions to how the company treated its own people. Performance metrics had been revised to emphasize positive customer experiences rather than gotcha moments like catching passengers in the wrong boarding group. "Mr. Robinson?" A young flight attendant approached tentatively. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation at gate C10 that might need your attention. A passenger is upset about the new boarding process." Anthony and Teresa exchanged glances. "I'll come take a look," Anthony said. When they arrived at gate C10, a man in an expensive suit was speaking loudly to the gate agent, his body language aggressive. "I've been a Diamond Elite member for 15 years, he was saying. "This new boarding process is ridiculous. I paid for priority boarding." The gate agent, a young man named Luis according to his name tag, maintained a calm, professional demeanor. "I understand your concern, sir. While our boarding process has changed, your first-class experience on board remains premium. You'll still have priority baggage handling, extra legroom, and enhanced meal service." "That's not the point," the man insisted. "The point is recognition. When you call Diamond Elite, everyone knows who the important customers are." Anthony stepped forward. "Excuse me, I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Anthony Robinson, CEO of Horizon North Star." The man's demeanor changed instantly. "Mr. Robinson, I'm Thomas Blackwell, Westridge Financial. I was just explaining to this young man that your new boarding process undermines the value of elite status." "I appreciate your feedback, Mr. Blackwell," Anthony said sincerely. "May I ask you something? What's the most important thing to you when you travel?" Blackwell considered the question. "Efficiency. Respect for my time. Recognition of my loyalty." Anthony nodded. "All valid points. Our new system actually improves efficiency. Our tests show a 23% reduction in total boarding time. As for recognition, we're shifting that to where it matters most. Onboard service, lounge access, upgrade priority, rather than creating a public hierarchy at the gate." I hadn't thought of it that way, Blackwell admitted. The truth is, Anthony continued, our previous system sometimes created tensions that diminished everyone's experience. We believe dignity shouldn't be tiered, even if services are. Luis, the gate agent, was watching this exchange with fascination. Anthony turned to him. Excellent job maintaining composure, Luis. That's exactly how these conversations should be handled. Luis straightened with pride. Thank you, sir. As they walked away, Teresa shook her head in admiration. 6 months ago, that passenger would have gotten his way just by being loud enough. And Luis might have been reprimanded for not keeping a valuable customer happy, regardless of how unreasonable the demand, Anthony added. Breaking that cycle was essential. They reached gate C22 where Anthony's flight to Denver would soon board. I should get ready, Anthony said. The regional managers are expecting a traditional CEO presentation, but I'm planning to shake things up a bit. How so? Teresa asked. I'm bringing a gate agent and a baggage handler with me. Their perspectives on our changes are more valuable than mine. Teresa smiled. That's why this is working, you know. You actually listen to the people doing the work. Anthony's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. Dad, check CNN's website. Your story is trending again. He opened the link to find an article titled, Sky High Change, How One CEO Transformed Airline Culture. After experiencing discrimination, the piece detailed the improvements at Horizon North Star, noting that customer complaints had dropped by 43%, while employee retention had reached an all-time high. Looks like word is spreading, Anthony said, showing Teresa the article. Does it bother you? She asked. Having that day constantly brought up? Anthony thought about it. Not anymore. That moment of discomfort led to real change for thousands of people. I can live with that trade-off. The boarding announcement for the Denver flight began using the new protocol. Anthony watched passengers line up without the usual jostling for position. You know, Teresa said quietly, that day at LaGuardia was the worst mistake of my career. But looking back, I'm almost grateful it happened. How so? Anthony asked. Because it forced me to confront something in myself I might have otherwise ignored. And it connected me with work that actually matters. She gestured to the smooth boarding process unfolding before them. This matters, Anthony nodded. It does. Your row is boarding, Mr. Robinson, Teresa pointed out. Anthony shouldered his bag. Back to work for both of us. The Denver team has some great ideas for improving crew scheduling. I'll see you at next week's task force meeting, Teresa said. We're presenting the final draft of the customer feedback overhaul. As Anthony joined the boarding line, no special treatment. Just like any other passenger, he reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The acquisition had been just the beginning. The real transformation had been in the company's soul. He glanced back at Teresa, now helping an elderly passenger with her boarding pass. 6 months ago, they had been adversaries in a moment of tension. Today, they were collaborators in a mission larger than either of them. Sometimes, Anthony thought as he handed his boarding pass to Luis, the most powerful changes began with the most uncomfortable moments. The key was what you built from them.